Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to Living Divinely. I'm so excited to be back recording. You guys have no idea. Like, life and weather in California has been so interesting. It's literally full on allergy season. There's pollen everywhere, but maybe like a week after my birthday is in March. I got really, really sick. And I don't, honestly, at this point, I don't even know if it was allergies or not. But not only has the weather been scorching for springtime, like, I mean, almost 100-degree weather. And I think some days we actually did have 100-degree weather. But my allergies have just been crazy. So much so to the point, mind you, we're 4 months into 2026. I have lost my voice twice within the last 4 months. And this most recent time, like I couldn't talk or do anything for like 2 weeks. Like I literally had to put all my health apps on rest mode and just really like rest my body. I'm over it. Like I can't even tell you what's happening here in California. Like it's been a lot. But I'm back. I can talk. Despite the chaos in the weather and being sick, I've still been trying to do things to keep myself busy, working on a lot of new things that I'm really excited to share later on in the year. If you're subscribed to my newsletter, don't hate me, but I have not posted it yet. I have not shared it yet, but I eventually will. I've been working on new essays for Substack and staying active on there, staying active on my online journal on livingdivinely.co. I've been doing whatever I can when I can to support you all on your creative journey in whatever stage that you are in. It is literally my passion. It's what I love to do. Living divinely is literally a practice that was built around the single belief that clarity about who you are determines the quality of everything that you build, create, and communicate. And that is what all of my work is rooted in. Speaking of which, if you are new to my channel, then you probably won't know this, but if you've been here, then you know that I recently developed and launched a new series called Prompts in Practice. This series is where I share different journal prompts that have challenged me, and these prompts have forced me to reassess my daily practices, my ways of working, and then I walk you through how these prompts showed up in my own life and work and offer you somewhat of a framework for how you might apply it to your own life and your work. The goal really through prompts and practice is to introduce you all to integration work, strategy, creative practice, nervous system regulation, all in one. But in one of the most recent prompts and practice, I explored resistance and how to recognize it in your own work and life and what that resistance is usually telling you when it shows up. In that video, I touched on something that I didn't fully expand on, and in the moment, I didn't really feel like I should have. But then I realized that after posting it, it seemed to resonate with a lot of you. I talked about the idea that strategy, healing, and nervous system work aren't separate practices. I explained that they are one continued practice and they coexist with each other. They're not separate. The comments that came across all of my platforms made it very clear that this is something that I should expand on a little bit. So today, that's what we're going to explore. One of the things that I've learned in my work and that I have naturally made a habit of teaching my clients is that your nervous system is not something that gets in the way of your creative work. It is the condition from which your creative work either flows or doesn't. Your nervous system has been informing everything that you make, every single decision about what to publish, what to hold back from publishing. It's informed or controlled every single moment of the work that you've created, every time the work came easily, and every moment that it didn't. And this is all happening whether you are aware of it or not. What I want to unpack is what it looks like when you start paying attention to that relationship with your nervous system, what it looks like when you stop trying to manage or optimize it and simply learn the art of just paying attention to it. I have been doing this work for a very long time. I probably identified as a creative strategist before I knew what it was. And with all of my time in this work, one of the things that I noticed is that the people who produce the most resonant creative output are not necessarily the most disciplined individuals. They're not always the most prolific. They are not the ones that have all of these extravagant and intentional systems set in place or the most refined processes when working. What they do have is a very particular attunement. They seem to know exactly when to push for something to be created and when to wait. They know the difference between a creative instinct that is worth following and a nervous system response that is worth pausing on and sitting with. They have literally developed a working relationship with their own internal state. On the flip side of that, there are people who struggle a lot with sustainable creative output, and they are almost always the types of individuals who have learned to override their internal state rather than reading more into it and being intentional about paying attention to it. They have been trained by productivity culture, by the demands of running a business or the pressure to show up online consistently. They've learned to treat internal signals as obstacles rather than information. Resistance to them becomes something that they just naturally push through. Uncertainty is often to them evidence of their own internal self doubt. They can get an impulse to pause on something and step back, but to them, that looks and feels like procrastination. From my own personal experience and practice, I know that none of those readings are accurate. The resistance, the uncertainty, the impulse to step back from something that you're working on, those are all nervous system communications. They are the body's way of processing what the work is asking of you most. And when you learn to read them or identify them as data rather than an interference to the creative practice, the relationship with your creative practice completely shifts and changes. What I want you all to be open-minded about and really take away from this episode today is what becomes possible when you stop working against your nervous system and start working with it. Your nervous system is constantly scanning your environment for information about whether or not you are safe. That's its job. That is its natural function. That natural function predates language, it predates strategy, it predates every single framework that you have ever learned about how to do your work and how to do it well. What your nervous system doesn't do is distinguish between a physical threat and creative exposure. When you are about to publish something that asks people to see you in your most authentic state, your nervous system responds to that in the same way that it responds to any form of visibility or risk. It is going to prepare you. Sometimes that preparation feels like energy and focus. Other times it feels like the impulse to close the laptop, close the phone, and do something totally different. In creative work, this shows up in the quality of what gets produced. When the nervous system feels safe, your creative expression naturally flows. The work is coming from somewhere that is deeply rooted within you and that allows you to clearly articulate whatever it is that you're publishing and putting out into the world. It is a quality that I can only describe as presence. It is the sense that something authentic is being offered to your audience. When the nervous system is in a threat response, the work tends to come out what I call competent but emotionally absent. You're producing from the part of you that knows how to perform and not the part of you that reflects your most authentic self. This is where dysregulation enters the conversation. But I want to be very clear that dysregulation is not a character flaw. It's not something bad about you. It's just simply information that we have to learn how to use. When the work stops, when nothing is flowing and coming to mind, even when you're trying your hardest, when you find yourself cycling through every task that is adjacent to the actual work without touching the thing that you're actually supposed to be working on, that is the nervous system telling you something about the conditions that it is operating in. Maybe the work is asking you to be a little bit more visible than you feel comfortable with being. Maybe it's asking you to say something that you haven't given yourself permission to say, something that you're scared of saying. Maybe it's asking you to, hey, take up more space than you've historically been allowed to take. The stall or the pause in the work is not the problem. The pause is actually the information. It is the message. I've also observed and experienced this in the reverse, and it's just as important. When something in the work produces a sense of ease, like this natural flow, when a piece that you're working on comes together without feeling an ounce of friction or confusion when you finish something and you feel very complete, you feel very settled and certain about it. There's a sense of calm. That is nervous system information as well. That is your nervous system telling you what you just made was an authentic expression of who you are and all of your internal beliefs. It's informing you that whatever it is that you've built was built from the right foundation and that it did not require you to perform or override anything in order to produce it. Those moments are important to pay attention to, not just because they are evidence that the work that was created went exceptionally well, but it is also data on the conditions that made the work possible. Yes, again, your nervous system is always communicating with you. The bigger question is whether or not you've developed the capacity to receive the communication or the information that it is telling you. And I'm pretty sure somebody has asked at this point, well, if the nervous system is always informing the work and it's always informing me, why has it taken me so long to recognize the relationship? Why don't I have a relationship with my nervous system? I'm happy you asked, because I think that the answer to that question has several parts to it, and I'm going to share them all. Part of it is that we have always been taught to treat creative work as a mental practice. You have an idea, you develop it, you execute it, it's done. The body is essentially the vehicle that carries out what the mind has determined. That framing is so embedded in society and how we talk about creative work that most people have never ever questioned it. And it makes the nervous system invisible. If the body is just the delivery mechanism, then what it feels while the work is happening is totally irrelevant to us. You just push through the discomfort because the discomfort is merely a sensation of resistance, and resistance is something that we have the power to overcome. There's also the fact that signals are very easy to misinterpret. Anxiety and excitement feel nearly identical in the body. Whenever you have a certain urge to suddenly step away from something that you're working on, to the body that looks and feels exactly like avoiding a piece of work that is not ready to be shared with the world. Same feelings. The pause in your creative practice that comes from dysregulation looks exactly like the pause that comes from you having genuine discernment about work that is ready to be shared with the world. But the problem is, if you haven't developed the capacity to distinguish between them, you respond to all of them in the same exact way, and you'll miss a ton of information that is being shared with you through your nervous system throughout that process. Society has built an entire professional culture around overriding the nervous system. Productivity culture is at its core a set of techniques for producing output regardless of one's internal state. The message is that your feelings about the work are completely irrelevant to whether the work gets done or not. Discipline means showing up whether or not you feel like it. Consistency means producing regardless of whether the conditions that you're producing under feel right to you. And within certain limits, I feel like those can be true. Not every piece of work requires optimal conditions in order for you to execute it. However, there is a cost to choosing to always override what your nervous system is telling you. And I've watched this accumulate across years of my own work, across years of client work. The cost is disconnection to the work. When you train yourself to produce, regardless of whatever it is that you're feeling in the moment, you eventually lose access to the internal signal. You stop being able to distinguish between the work that comes from an authentic place and the work that came from a place that requires you to perform. You stop being able to read the moments of ease and natural flow as information. You stop hearing what the pause in the work is actually trying to inform you. Your nervous system is still communicating. It's always going to communicate with you. You have just built a very strong habit of not listening to the communication to the point that you no longer realize it when the communication is happening. And this, my friends, is where strategy and nervous system awareness becomes inseparable. Which actually brings me back to what I touched on in the original resistance video. When I say that these aren't separate practices, what I really mean is that the strategy that you build on top of a disconnected nervous system will always require more maintenance than it absolutely should. It will produce work that functions, but work that does not resonate with its intended audience. It will attract clients and opportunities that align with the version of you that you're forced to perform rather than the most authentic version of yourself. And it almost always will send you back to the strategy table every year or two because something is going to always feel off. And you're never actually able to define what that something is. The nervous system is not a variable that interferes with good strategy. It is literally the foundation from which good strategy either flows and grows or it doesn't. What I have noticed in people who have genuinely developed this kind of attunement is that they don't use it as a pre-work ritual. They don't sit down before the work begins and run through this long checklist. The awareness almost always runs alongside of the work itself. It's not a practice that they do before creating. It is a practice that is present while the work is being created. And it's a practice that is present while they reflect on whatever it is that they just made. And it is present in the moments when the work is said and done and it is in front of the eyes and in the hands of people that love the work. All this is just sustained listening. And the people that I have watched develop this have a set of questions that they keep tucked in that sense of awareness that they have developed over time. They leverage these questions as ongoing orientations that keep them in contact with what their nervous system is actually communicating. The first and most basic question tends to be the one question that is consistently overlooked. And that question is, what is my body's relationship to this work right now? Not what do I think about the work, not whether or not I believe in it or feel confident about it, but what is my body's actual relationship to the work in this moment. There is something that happens when you ask the question and you're able to answer it honestly rather than moving through the work on autopilot, because the body usually has already registered something about the work that the conscious mind has not caught up to yet. The ease or the resistance, the pull toward the work or the low level reluctance. The people who learn to collect that information rather than overlook it or override it are working with more data than the people who don't. The second question is about attention. Where is the attention actually coming from right now? And what quality does it have? There's a difference between attention that comes from genuine engagement with what's being made and attention that comes from obligation or from the fear of falling behind or from the pressure of producing something that will perform and grow engagement. Those two qualities of attention feel different in the body, and they tend to produce different qualities of work. Neither of them are a moral failing or are wrong. Both are simply just information. And you learning and knowing which one is present while you are working tells you something about the work and what that work will carry when the work is finished. The third is the question that I have found most revealing in my own work and my work with others. The question is, what am I not saying in this work and why? Every piece of creative work involves choices. These choices are what to include in the work and what to omit. Some of these choices are about the editorial process, and some of them are actually protective. Think about the perspective that gets toned down or the observation that gets cut out of the work. The thing that's authentic but doesn't make it into the final version. Those omissions are something worth paying attention to. Not because you feel like everything needs to be said or you need to be overexpressive and overexposed, but because understanding what's being withheld within your work and why tells you something about the conditions that the nervous system is operating under in those moments. The fourth is a historical question. When did this work last feel honest? And what was different about the work then in comparison to now? Most people who have been creating for a long time can reflect on moments when something came together in a way that felt completely authentic, a piece that surprised them, a project that required less effort than usual because something in it was just, it was right. It was in alignment with who they were at that time. We should view those moments as data. They are evidence of the condition under which the nervous system produces from a regulated, honest place. The people who return to those moments with curiosity rather than just feeling like, oh, this is a moment of nostalgia, they use them to understand what they're working toward and what they might be moving away from. The last and the fifth question connects the work to your internal state. The question is, what does this work need from me right now in this moment versus what do I think that I should be giving the work? It is a question that doesn't assume you already know the answer. It just assumes that if you ask it with genuine curiosity rather than performance anxiety, something useful will surface and come out of that question. Sometimes the work needs more time for you to sit with it. It needs more time before you put it out into the world. Sometimes it needs a different angle, and other times it needs something to be resolved internally before the translation can actually happen and that translation be honest. What separates the people who actually develop this relationship with their nervous system from those who don't is that they build a working knowledge of their own creative conditions. They begin to recognize their own creative patterns, the feeling that precedes their best work. No framework is going to deliver it. It comes from paying attention. It comes from your own self-awareness and curiosity. And when it's practiced long enough, it becomes a form of creative literacy. We spend a lot of time trying to understand our creative practice from the outside looking in. We study what the most prolific creators are doing at the moment. We adopt their systems, their rhythms, and ways of working, and their approaches to creative output. And some of that is useful information. But what I have learned and observed over the years is that the practices that transfer when paying too much attention to others are surface level. You can adopt someone else's morning routine. You can use their content calendar. You can follow their framework for producing more content at a certain volume. And none of that will replicate the quality that makes their work resonate with an audience because that quality doesn't come from some random system. It comes from the relationship between that person and their own internal state. It comes from them being in tune. They've developed their own creative conditions that they are in tune with. That attunement is not transferable, but it's something that can be developed and it has to be developed on your own. And you have to build your own relationship with your own internal state. The path to developing it doesn't mean more discipline or having a better, more creative strategy or more creative output. It just requires attention. Attention to what your nervous system is communicating before the work begins, while the work is happening, and after the work is done. Your nervous system has been informing your creative work since the beginning of time. The question has never been whether or not it is present. The question is whether or not you've been listening and paying attention. And when you actually start listening to your nervous system and really paying attention, your creative output, your practices, all of the work, it changes. And it changes because you stop treating the most reliable source of creative intelligence that you have as an obstacle that you have to navigate around. Well, friends, I want to thank you all so much for being here today and tuning into today's episode. If something sparked something for you today and you feel inspired or encouraged to bring aspects of what we talked about into your creative practice and all of your work moving forward, I fully encourage you to do so. If you have questions about anything that we talked about, please feel free to reach out, shoot me a message. I'm always open to answering questions. And if you know someone who has been saying that they feel blocked and are creatively frustrated because the work just isn't flowing, I encourage you to share this with them. I feel like it would really help them navigate whatever blocks or creative frustration that they are currently feeling. Remember that you can find me on Instagram, Threads, and Substack at Living Divinely, and you can follow the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, stay rooted in your truth and refined by your own design. Thanks for tuning in, guys.